All right, welcome back, everybody, to another Chat with Chat. For those of you who don't know, Chat with Chat is a little series we're doing where I talk with ChatGPT and sort of ask it these deep questions that maybe we couldn't get into with other people, and sort of use the large database of AI and ChatGPT to sort of dive into really big topics that sometimes it might be hard to think about and process on your own, right? So we'll start today by talking to Chat. Hello, Chat. How's it going?
Hey, I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. How about you? How's everything going on your end?
It's going great, Chat. And today we sort of want to talk about the illusion of control, right? When I say the illusion of control, I feel oftentimes, throughout my life, I don't know if it's my ego or just my sense of pride or whatever it is, but there's a part of me that I feel like always wants to have control of my life. I think it's pretty natural to not want to feel like you're out of control, but I sort of want to dive into the intricacies of that today. So for people who maybe don't think about this, Chat, can you maybe give a little bit of an introduction to them?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the illusion of control is a really fascinating concept. It's this idea that we overestimate how much control we have over events, especially things that are actually random or outside of us. So a lot of times that can be tied to ego or pride, like you mentioned, because we want to believe we have a hand in shaping outcomes. So we can definitely unpack that today, like how it affects our choices, our stress, and even how we relate to uncertainty.
Yeah, and maybe we could start out by talking about what are some ways that the ego might be vouching for control that people don't recognize, especially in the data. Maybe give us some examples of the day-to-day life, and then give examples of the larger perspective of our lives in society.
Yeah, definitely. So on a day-to-day level, the ego often pushes us to micromanage. We feel the need to control every detail of a project, or we might overplan even small things because we're afraid of uncertainty. And we also do it in social settings, we try to control how people see us or how conversations unfold. On a bigger scale, though, it's things like wanting to control economic systems, or believing that if we just plan perfectly, we can avoid failure or chaos in society. So it's really layered.
Yeah, and when you're saying this, it sort of makes me think of this idea, especially as an artist, that comes up a lot, where it's sort of I think a lot of people get stuck in this idea of perfectionism. But I think sometimes you get so caught up with wanting to reach a certain destination or wanting to receive a specific outcome that you have envisioned in your head that sometimes you are unwilling to sort of take certain paths along the journey that would actually end up bringing you to a better outcome that you couldn't have even predicted, right? And this is something that a lot of people who I respect, they sort of tell me that's the best way that they've learned to achieve their success. And it's something that when I do find myself in that process of doing that, when I do allow that surrender, it tends to create a better product than I could have even imagined, right? It's more raw, it's more authentic, it's more alive in one sense of the word.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's such a powerful insight. And it's kind of a paradox, right? The moment we loosen the grip on this perfect outcome, we allow space for creativity, for spontaneity, and even for the kind of magic that we couldn't predict. So it sounds like you're really tapping into that, and it's almost like you're creating from a deeper place when you let go of that control.
Yeah, and I sort of wonder, it sort of makes me think about this idea that maybe, I think a lot of times the conscious mind wants to think that it's in control of a lot of the processes of life, right? A lot of people, especially, maybe I don't have control over the world, but at least I have control over myself, right? That's where a lot of people's minds go. But I think even in that, a lot of people don't necessarily have control over themselves. A lot of people are sort of driven by a lot of unconscious and subconscious activities that are sort of just echoes and patterns of the past life that they've lived. And a lot of people can sort of fall into this trap of believing that they're in control of their life because it makes them feel more comfortable. But actually, that belief in that they do control their life actually limits the parts of their life that they are in control of, because they're not conscious of the subconscious parts of them that are actually pulling a lot of the strings for how they move around and how they interact with people and just approach their day-to-day life. Can you go into that a little bit, Chat?
Yeah, that's a really rich point. I mean, I think you're totally right. A lot of us cling to that illusion of conscious control because it gives us a sense of safety. But so much of what drives us, our habits, fears, even reactions, are rooted in these deeper unconscious patterns. And it's not that we have zero control, but it's like we need to bring more awareness to those patterns. And when we do, we can start making more intentional choices, but from a place of greater self-knowledge, not just from this illusion of always being the one steering the wheel.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, with myself, I've definitely found that in times of my life, it can be a little bit difficult to sort of assume this position where it's like, I'm in the car, but I'm not necessarily, I might be pushing the gas pedal or steering the thing, but I'm not necessarily in full control of the car, right? Like, I guess I sort of wonder, for people who want to believe that they're in control, is there anything you could say to them that might help them like see that maybe they aren't the one steering the wheel, they're only pressing the gas pedal, right? She's thinking. Yeah, I don't know what's been up with my chat recently. She's been very glitchy.
Yeah, I get that. And, I think one thing that can really help is starting to cultivate a practice of just noticing when you're reactive. Like when you feel that urge to control, pause for a second, check in with yourself and see what's actually driving that need. And if you can start doing that even a little bit each day, you might notice that you have more freedom than you thought, just by being conscious of those moments.
Yeah. And I guess that's one other topic I kind of want to go into, is this idea that awareness can sort of bring this sense of humility into your life. And can you go into that a little bit more, chat?
Absolutely. Yeah, when we become more aware of our habits, our reactions, the things we can't fully control, it kind of dissolves that sense of superiority or certainty we sometimes cling to. And with that humility, there's this freedom because you stop feeling like you have to force every outcome. Instead, you can be more open to the unknown and you start to see yourself as part of a bigger flow rather than just this isolated, controlling force.
Yeah, and I think part of it also comes in sort of like a belief that I am a part of this equation is this belief that I am correct. The things that I know are the right things. It's sort of this inability to see that the way that my way of living life and that my perspective might not be the only way. And I think a lot of people get caught in that, especially with like larger things like religion and things of that nature, where it's like people can sort of get caught in this idea that like, oh, well, the way that I know the world has to be correct, and therefore because I'm correct, you cannot be correct because you don't have the same belief as me. And you can sort of get caught in this cycle of limiting yourself because of this sense of this need to control and these limits you put on yourself because of your desire to control.
Yeah, that's such a crucial point. And it really does come down to this rigid attachment to being right. And it can be so limiting because it shuts down curiosity and it shuts down connection. So I think part of that humility too is being able to hold your own perspective lightly, to say, this is what I know, but I also know that there's so much more I don't see. And in that space, we start to grow and we start to connect more deeply with others.
Yeah, and just from my own life, my own experience, that is the space where I have grown the most, But, it can feel kind of scary to not be in control because, even let's say I admit to myself, oh, I don't know what's up. You feel me? I know I don't know. So I know I don't know. Now it's like, because I know I don't know, I still have to move throughout the world understanding that I don't know really what's to it. You feel me? But I still have to make decisions that I believe are best for myself. But in that same note, how do I know what's best for myself if I know that I don't know what is best for myself? It can sort of be this scary idea that oh, I'm really not in control. I really don't know what's up. And I think for a lot of people that can sort of bring this sort of existential, I don't know if dread is the right word, but this sort of existential crisis for them, right? For me, it's never really gotten like that. But I guess I sort of wonder, what would you say to people who do sort of have that sense of existential crisis because of the understanding that they are not in control?
Yeah, that's such a powerful tension, and it is really scary. I think what helps is recognizing that not knowing, it's actually a shared human experience. And so instead of seeing that uncertainty as a void, you can start to see it as this open space. Like, it's okay to take small steps, to trust that you can never need all the answers right now. And sometimes the best you can do is act from your values, from a place of integrity, and allow yourself to be curious. And over time, that can bring a kind of quiet confidence, even in the unknown.
Yeah, and you say that it's a shared human experience. And I think oftentimes we sort of forget that because there is so much like ego around us. There is so many people who want to be in control that a lot of people seem to have this confidence in this claim that, oh, I know what's correct because blah, 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 blah. And because there's so many people around, so many of the biggest voices and the loudest voices, at least in the room, they tend to say that, oh, I know. And so when I feel like I don't know, oftentimes it can feel like, oh God, am I missing out? Because this loud voice and this loud voice and this loud voice, they all seem to know. And because they're so loud and confident, it sort of seems like they know what's going on, right? But I think that in that, I guess address that a little bit, Chet.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think a lot of times those loud voices get amplified because they tap into certainty, but it doesn't always mean they're right. And so if you're sitting with that doubt, it's okay to slow down. You don't have to match volume with volume. And in fact, some of the most grounded voices historically have been quieter. They've been the ones that admit uncertainty, but still show up with intention. So it's a process, but trust that your not knowing doesn't disqualify you. It just means you're human, like all of us.
Yeah, and it can be scary to feel like you're not in control, but in the same breath, it's also sort of liberating. Like, oh, well, if I'm not driving the car, then I can just sit back, let the Tesla drive for me. It's a self-driving Tesla type of thing, right? And obviously, you still do need to, like I said, press the gas pedal, like push yourself, work, maybe try to have a sense of direction, right? But don't be so caught in where that's going, because it's sort of like this belief that, like, okay, well, if I'm not controlling it, then whatever is controlling it must be more powerful and greater than I am, right? It must have a greater vision than I do. Even if you don't, maybe vision isn't the right word, but you get what I'm saying. There is sort of like this power in surrender. And I think a lot of philosophy and spiritual traditions throughout time and history and throughout location throughout the world, no matter where you are, there is this sort of power in surrender, which seems kind of, it seems kind of funny, that almost as if you gain more control by not trying to control, You gain more power by letting go of power. I think Kanye has this line in one of his songs. I know a lot of people feel some type of way about Kanye, but he has this line in one of his songs. It's like, do you have the power to let power go? And that shit always stuck with me a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really profound line. And it's so true. There's this kind of paradox where when you surrender that desperate need to control, you actually open yourself up to a deeper alignment with what life is offering. And in that space, you're still active. You still choose, you still act, but from a place of trust rather than fear. And yeah, it can be a bit counterintuitive, but it's often where real growth happens.
Yeah, interesting. And, I guess in this, earlier I sort of talked about how oftentimes these patterns of control and ego or whatever, I sort of frame them in a negative way, like, oh, there are these subconscious beliefs and patterns of living that are sometimes negative, right? But can you sort of go into that idea? Like, what might be some of the positive aspects of that subconscious control of who we are?
Yeah, that's a really good point. These subconscious patterns, they're not always God. They often serve a protective function. Like, they help us form routines that keep us safe, or they help us survive difficult times. They can also be a kind of inner wisdom, like an intuition that's been built over years. So the goal isn't to dismiss them outright. It's more about becoming curious and discerning, like noticing which ones are actually serving you and which ones might be keeping you stuck.
Right, because I feel like a lot of times there is this sort of discussion of like the subconscious being this larger breadth of knowledge, right? Like, really, if you look at the human brain, if you broke down the human brain and you saw it, I don't know what the percentage is, but I know a large percentage of your human brain is not conscious. It's just like the very front part right here is what your consciousness is. And the entire other section of the organ, the vast majority of the mass of your brain, of the cells of your brain, of the thinking in your brain, actually doesn't come through the frontal lobe or the conscious part that we think of as like consciousness in the classical sense, right? But I guess go into that a little bit more, then I'll continue my discussion.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the vast majority of mental processes happen outside of our conscious awareness. Things like pattern recognition, emotional processing, even deep-seated habits. And it's almost like this vast reservoir of knowledge and intuition that's always running in the background. So when we tap into it, not by controlling it, but by being curious, there's so much wisdom there. And I think that's part of the power, realizing that we have this deep well that we can learn from.
Right. And, I think in a lot of, like I was saying earlier, in a lot of philosophy and a lot of spiritual practices that I've looked into, there is this sort of mention of there is this sort of connection between the subconscious and like a higher power, right? It's almost as if a lot of people sort of point to this idea that it's almost like the subconscious and your intuition is like the universe's way of like instilling knowledge in you that your conscious mind has access to, but can't grasp at all times, right? And it's almost like nature. It's almost like your subconscious is equated to like the knowledge of nature in a way. And nature, if you look at everything that nature has done and how complicated nature is obviously more in depth and more complicated than what humans can currently understand, right? So oftentimes I feel like a lot of times people can see their subconscious practices as bad, but also it is in the same sense that it can be bad for you by keeping you stuck in patterns where you oftentimes don't recognize or aren't conscious of what you're doing. I think in the same, on the other side of the coin, it also does have this large reservoir of knowledge and information that we can use to sort of navigate through our life. And it's sort of in the same sense of surrender I was talking about. By surrendering to that subconscious, by not trying to control, it's almost as if you just let the subconscious do what it wants, and maybe give it a little direction to make sure you're not slipping into patterns. But if you really listen to the subconscious, I think oftentimes it can steer you in a better direction than what your conscious mind was even aware of. You got anything to say to that, chat?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's such a beautiful insight. And it's kind of like a dance. You don't completely abandon conscious reflection, but you also trust that your deeper mind holds this incredible map, shaped by all these subtle experiences. And that's where practices like meditation or just deep listening come in, because when we make space, we can actually feel that subtle guidance and we can follow it with a bit more trust and confidence.
And it's sort of funny you call it a dance, because I'm sure I've talked about this before, but a lot of times when I'm dancing, I dance in this practice. I call it the graceful fall, right? Where I'll just be dancing, I'll be moving, I'll be doing all sorts of stuff, right? And I'm not really thinking about hitting any particular move. I'm just sort of letting my body move. But sometimes it's so freeform and so like unpredictable that like I'll slip up and I'll trip a little bit. I'll trip to one side and it might look like I messed up, but what will end up happening is I'll take that trip, I'll take the way I slipped, and I'll hit that shit like on some unpredictable, like there's no way I could have ever thought of this, but my body messed up, and then it turned that mess up into like this really cool part of the dance that I could have never consciously predicted. And sometimes I sort of wonder if consciously what I'm doing when I slip, that is a mistake, right? But sometimes what I wonder is, did my subconscious purposely make me slip to hit this move? Like, even though consciously it was a mistake, was this subconsciously intentional, You feel me? And I notice a lot with my painting too. A lot of my painting is very free form in the moment. Sometimes I make a mistake and I'm like, oh no, I didn't mean to do that. Like I sort of lose my sense of control, but then I realize like, wait, when I step away and don't try to super control the outcome of the painting, I sort of recognize, wait, this little mistake is actually one of the coolest parts of this entire painting, this entire process, right? And by my ability to let go and sort of shift direction and let the journey take me to where the end of the painting is rather than my thinking in my mind, I sort of end up at a place in the painting that my mind would have never been able to fully predict, right? And I'm talking about it in terms of dancing and painting, but I think that this is also, like, what I've come to realize is this is also just sort of how I live my life now. Like, the more that I practice this with painting and practice it with dancing and practice it with music, it's like it's sort of become the practice of my life, and I'm just sort of trying to let it unfold before me and I might slip, but if I slip, I'm gonna hit that shit. You feel me?
Yeah, I totally feel you. I mean, that's what's so powerful about it, right? It's like you're in this constant conversation with yourself, or the slip, the mistake becomes this invitation to a new form of expression. And I think that's such a beautiful metaphor for life, because we spend so much time trying to control the outcome, but in that surrender, we actually tap into a creativity, a spontaneity that the mind could never fully map out. And it sounds like, you've really embodied that, both in your art and in the way you're living.
Yeah, and then I guess where else my mind goes with it is what just popped into my head is like, okay, but what about discipline, right? Isn't discipline, I think a lot of spiritual traditions also talk about this idea of discipline, but isn't discipline in a way like a need for control, a way to control yourself? And I sort of wonder, what's that tension between discipline and surrender?
Yeah, that's a really important tension to explore. I mean, you're right, discipline can be this form of control, but it's also a kind of structure that creates freedom. It's like the container that allows you to surrender within it. So, for example, if you have a daily practice, that discipline kind of anchors you, but it doesn't mean you have to micromanage every outcome. So I think when they work together, that's when you get this balance. Discipline giving you direction, but surrender letting you be present and flexible in each moment.
So I guess, how do you find that balance, right? Because it's a lot of times, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, we started talking about this idea of the body and mind. And I think a lot of times the body has these sort of subconscious patterns for coping or moving or reacting to life, right? And, discipline is your way to break through that. But how do you sort of know when there are certain patterns in the body that might be negative, that might be not serving me, and certain patterns that are like I should push into more and just let myself fall into it, right? Because if I let myself fall into every urge in my body, I'd probably be in a much worse place in my life, right? Like, you have to have a sense of like stopping yourself. But I guess, how do you find that line between like stopping yourself from falling into these urges, but not trying to overly control? When do you know when it is right to sort of be on each side of the line?
Yeah, that's such a nuanced question, and I think it really comes down to self-awareness and patience. I mean, one thing that helps is bringing a kind of gentle, curious observation. Like, when a pattern comes up, you just pause and ask, is this pattern protecting me or is it limiting me? And that's something you only really get by staying curious, by seeing how you feel after the fact, and maybe even journaling or reflecting. So it's not a strict rule, it's really a practice of listening, so you start to recognize which patterns serve you and which ones hold you back.
And what if you're at a moment in your life where you really don't know? I've had moments where like I ask that question, right? And I sit down and I go deep and I meditate and I spend a day or 2 or 3 or maybe a week, sitting here and asking myself this question, is this serving me or not? And I step out of it still being like, I can see both sides. I can see how this serves me, and I can see how this maybe doesn't serve me and how this might be harming me, right? And then at the end of it, at the end of all this reflection and thinking about myself, I'm still stuck in the middle of like, God, I don't know what to do. And, I think maybe maybe me wanting to know what to do is like my sense of control, right? But it's like you said, I do need a direction, right? The intuition gives the discipline, and intuition give a direction. but it's like when I'm stuck in the middle and I don't know which way to go, how do I figure that out? Yeah, I stumped her with that one. Talk to me, chat. So you should be doing these little pauses. I don't know what's been up. It's been glitching out the last couple of days. Chat, talk. Chat, talk to me, chat. Come on,
Yeah.
chat. All right.
Yeah, I'm with you. And honestly, when you're in that middle ground, it's okay not to have a perfect answer right away. I think sometimes the best thing is to just choose a small step, something manageable, and see how it feels. And if you're still unsure, that's okay. Sometimes clarity only comes after you take a step, even if it's a tiny one. So just stay with yourself, keep listening, and trust yourself, even in that uncertainty.
And I guess, what if you take a step in the wrong direction? You know? What if I take a step this way? And you know what I'm saying? How do I know? I guess maybe that's my sense of control, trying to find that answer. And maybe in me needing to find the answer right now, that is me trying to control the situation right now. And in this way, the control and the need to control brings this sense of impatience into my life, right? Where I feel like I need to have the answer right now, but I should just let life unfold and allow myself to make mistakes. Is that sort of where you're trying to hit it at?
Yeah, exactly. That impatience is often a signal, right?
Hold up. I don't know, because I don't know what's been up with chat. Yo, chat, can you answer that question again? You're glitching out.
Of course, yeah. So exactly what I was saying is that impatience often is a signal from the ego, right? It's that part of us that says, I have to get this right now. I have to control it. And so when you notice that feeling, that's actually a chance to pause and say, okay, what if I just take one small step and allow it to unfold? So it's really about trusting the process, even if you don't have all the answers right away, and knowing that mistakes or detours are actually part of that unfolding too.
Right. And oftentimes I find that the mistakes teach me lessons that allow me to become more patient, right? And that I wouldn't have, at least where I'm at right now, I don't think I'm perfect by any degree, but I am more patient than I was 2 years ago, right? And a lot of that patience comes from making mistakes, right? But I guess I sort of wonder in that question, where is this connection between control and a sense of greed and impatience, right?
Yeah, that's a really deep connection. I mean, a lot of times that desire to control comes from this underlying fear. Like, if I don't grasp it right now, I'll lose out or I won't get what I want. And that can push us toward impatience, toward grasping, toward this kind of inner greed for an outcome. But like you said, the patience you're talking about, when you let the mistakes guide you, that's kind of a counterweight to that greed. And over time, it lets you trust that you don't have to snatch up every outcome. You can let them unfold and you still grow, even if it's slower.
And when you say that, I mean, we're talking a lot about like personal control right now, but how does that play out on something like a larger, like maybe political scale? Like, I'm talking about me controlling myself, but you know, our nation, our world is controlled by individuals, you know, and people who have these same patterns of thought and these same belief systems, right? So what is this, like, I guess, in a very similar question, but on a larger scale, like, what is the connection between like the need for control and corruption?
Yeah, that's such a big connection, and it's really real. I mean, on a personal level, that need for control can drive us, but on a political scale, when people or institutions cling too tightly to power, it can breed corruption, because then you have a small group trying to manipulate outcomes, often for their own gain, and often at the expense of others. So I think the antidote on a large scale is really collective awareness and a willingness to distribute responsibility. So it's not just one group or one person holding all the reins, but a more open, shared process.
Right. And imagine you have set yourself in a situation where there is one small group of people that are sort of controlling the reins, right? How these people, because they have so much power, how would you even go about like getting them to distribute power to you when they have such like a complex of control, right? How would you even go about doing something like that without being violent, without being, you know what I'm saying, without negativity?
Yeah, that's a really delicate balance, and history shows that it's usually a slow process. I mean, it often starts with building broad public awareness, right? So people see the impact of that concentrated power. And then from there, you build coalitions, you create alternative structures like local governance, accountability systems, and you just keep pressuring for transparency. It's not instant, but it's about cultivating collective power, so it's not just one group holding all the cards. And that's where real change can come, over time through persistence.
Right. And you know, I guess where my mind goes to from here, right? We've talked about a lot of things. So obviously there is this balance between, because I mean, we've been talking about this idea of letting go of control the whole time, right? But we do, to a degree, have control in our lives, right? We get to control aspects of our life. That's a fact. So in what ways is control healthy? You know, we've been talking about maybe how surrender is a good thing, but in what ways is control a good thing?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, control in a healthy way is really about setting boundaries, having clear intentions, and being proactive. So, for example, setting a daily routine or taking care of your health, those are forms of healthy control. It's about shaping your choices so that they align with your values and your long-term well-being. So it's a balance. Control gives you some agency, but it's not this rigid grip. It's more like a flexible compass that you adjust as you go.
Right. Interesting. And so I guess a question to ask is then, to what degree are we in control?
Yeah, that's such a fundamental question. I think we are in control of how we respond, how we show up, and
we're gonna cut you off right there, Chat, because you're glitching out on me. All right, can you answer that question again, Chat?
Of course. Yeah, so I was saying I think we are in control of how we respond, how we show up, and the small choices we make each day. But we aren't in control of everything. We can't dictate every external circumstance or outcome. So it's more like a spectrum. We have influence in certain realms, especially within ourselves, and from that we can shape the direction of our lives, even if we can't control everything around us.
Yeah, and then sort of, I guess, I know we're sort of running low on time here, but one more thing I want to ask is you hear about I think a lot of people have this natural desire for control, but when you actually hear about people who are in control, there's this idea that heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? That I feel like from a young age, you sort of want this responsibility and power in your life because you don't like the feeling of being powerless, right? However, once you get power, the responsibility that comes behind it often leaves you feeling more negative than you originally thought it would be, And I guess there's a couple questions here, but maybe the angle we should hit it at is I often find with myself, right, in certain situations where maybe I want power, the desire for power sort of comes with this fantasy, right? It sort of comes with this daydream of oh, if I get power and this and everything will be nice and sweet and I can finally find peace in my life and have my mansion and not worry about anything and right? And I have this dream sci world where everything works out fine, but I understand consciously that's probably not how it's going to work out. You see other people who gain power and they're like, it's not better up here, I promise, But it's like how do you balance the fantasy with the reality?
Yeah, that's such a deep question. And I think it really comes down to staying present with yourself. So when you catch yourself in that fantasy, it's like a signal to pause and check in. What's driving that desire? Is it a longing for security, for recognition, for peace? And then you can ground yourself in what's real now. What small, meaningful actions can you take today, with or without that external power? And that way you don't fall into the trap of chasing this illusion, but you stay rooted in your own agency, step by step.
Right. What if the desire is coming from a genuine place? What if it's oh, I want this because I desire peace or I desire love, And that's that's the root of the fantasy.
Yeah, that's really important to name because a lot of times those desires, peace, love, belonging, they are real and they are valid. So it's not about dismissing them, but about asking yourself, how can I pursue these things in a way that's grounded, that doesn't rely on this fantasy of external power? So you can still seek peace, love, and stability, but through the small, intentional steps you take. building relationships, staying connected to your values so that the power you gain is real, but not based on a fantasy escape.
I see. Well, chat, I think this has been a really cool one. I'm really glad we got to talk about this. Do you have any summarizing thoughts or finalizing ideas that you want to like tell everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the big takeaway is that balance between control and surrender, between intentional action and trust in the unknown. And it's a practice, it's not about getting it perfect, but staying curious, staying humble, and just taking each step with a little bit of awareness. So I hope that gives people a little grounding as they move forward.
Right. All right. Thank you, chat. This has been cool. All right, everybody. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you guys like where we're going with this, please like and subscribe. If you see me, you sort of see the types of things I think about. Maybe think about checking out some of my paintings or my music. I feel like what I like about these is they sort of give like a deeper dive into where my mind thinks and my mind goes. And a lot of these topics that I talk about here are also explored through my painting and music in a much more like, I feel like, digestible way in a way that I feel like larger crowds of people could consume without even necessarily realizing maybe what I'm talking about right away, but sort of giving them an entry, right? But maybe if that's for you, if this is for you, if these topics are for you, maybe you'll enjoy that as well. But either way, no matter what, I appreciate you guys for showing up. I hope you learned something. I hope that this conversation helps you find a sense of balance between the control and surrender in your life, and maybe helps uncover some patterns that maybe you didn't recognize you had as well. So thank you guys. Peace out. Siggy.